Welcome to Praise, Prayer and Preaching with the Reverend Dr. Keith Garner, Superintendent and CEO of Wesley Mission.
I've given this address a title, Seize the Day. Carpe diem comes from the pen of the Roman poet Horace. I always thought Horace was an old, kind of old-fashioned name and didn't really have any history till I started to read some of these early fathers and some of those people that set down concepts and ideas that we have taken up, embraced, developed in the life of the Christian community. It encourages us to seize, enjoy, make use of the opportunity presented in a moment in time to do something about it. And those words, seize the day, seem highly appropriate at the beginning of a new year, 2017. Bartimaeus may have had that feeling that life was passing him by. Lots of things were happening around him, but nothing was fundamentally changing in his own life situation. However, he was sitting by the road begging. Perhaps this was his spot. Perhaps regularly he sat at this place. And having been to Jericho, I know how it can be that people pass through that city. And it could well be he sat there and suddenly things changed. Because for Bartimaeus, something important is about to happen that will change his whole life perspective. He was getting ready to seize the moment. He was getting ready to take hold of the opportunity that was now presented to him to make things rather different than they were to this point in time. He's going to take a change that would be irrevocable. It would mean from this moment on, it wouldn't be revoked or repealed. It's a change that comes through the renewal of sight, through light entering the dark world of Bartimaeus. Mark 10, 46 to 52, that was read to us just a moment ago, tells us that Jesus enters the city of Jerusalem. It's very much a place that people pass through. It's very much a journeying place. And I offer these thoughts as a pattern for growth as an organization. This is the last miracle before Jesus enters the city of Jerusalem. And I think it has much to say to us, particularly to those of us at Wesley Mission at this point in time. We've begun a journey of growth, and in the widest sense, we want to reach out to those in our community that are most in need. And we continue that conversation as to what those words might actually mean. Bartimaeus was not only a beggar on the road. I suspect it's Passover time. There's reason for saying that because of its position in Mark's Gospel. And if it's Passover time, there are many people on the road. Many people that are on the journey in different ways and situations in their lives. Bartimaeus was not a man who could be on journeys. He often had to be at the same place. That's what he could do as a blind man. Hardly march ahead of the crowd. And so it was that he spent so much time in that situation. In Matthew's account, actually, where Bartimaeus is mentioned, there are two people that are actually healed. Bartimaeus being, I think, the prominent one. Now, he could have accepted his situation as final. He could have said, I have sat here for years. My situation could be worse because giving alms, giving gifts to beggars was something that was considered honourable. So there would be some income level, however poor it was. He could have said, I'm going to accept this situation. But no, here was his moment to seize the day. Here was his moment to take hold of something that was a great opportunity that might never come his way again. There's a number of things which need to occur for him and for ourselves if we're going to seize the day. First of all, he and we have to articulate what our need really is. We have to outshout those who would discourage us. We have to move forward to take hold of the change that will come by seizing the day, and then be open to all those opportunities that faith presents to us. But firstly, articulating what our desire is. Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout. Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. That was his real need. Yes, you might say, yes, he cited, but he needed mercy. He needed help. And his desire was somehow that Jesus might make a difference to the situation in which he found himself. Now, Jesus is on this journey with his first team, his disciples who he had selected, and then also, I suspect, with the self-selecting team that began to surround Jesus whenever he conducted miracles, whenever he was part and parcel of a teaching ministry. He wants to continue this journey, but the setting is helpful to our understanding. Jesus has just been telling the disciples about the mistaken ways in which people like James and John had got it so wrong. But here's something fundamentally powerful is going to happen. There must have been some kind of commotion, I suspect, because the man who is begging in this place suddenly is stirred. Was it that as Jesus came through that city, that wherever Jesus went, there was a sense of commotion? Here's Jesus. People wanted to listen to him speak. I wonder what it was for Bartimaeus. Had he heard others talk about him? The one thing the blind man had was an acute sense of hearing. Had he heard many other people talk about what Jesus had done in their lives, in their situation? Well, that may be one thing. Did he know people that had been healed? I mean, if he's going to reach out for healing, clearly he's been listening to the healing conversations that have been going on. Did he know other people that had been healed? Was this his moment to seize the day? Within him, was there something welling up deep down within him that says, Bartimaeus, if you don't do something about it now, it never will happen? Bartimaeus didn't simply want to stay at the place where he felt his need. He wanted to see his need changed into something that would actually happen. Now, this operates at an individual level. I think it also operates in communities. It also operates in organizations when we overcome self-consciousness and reach out to express our need. We confess the need and the desire for change. Bartimaeus really had something that he needed to articulate. He allowed his heart, his mind, and his will to vitally connect one with the other, so that the articulation could take place. And he moves to a confession of faith. This past week has been already mentioned by one of our team in the service. I met with close to 60 for some of that day to give an address during a day that was a very, very significant one for many of our people, as they explored the need for growth and plans for growth into the future, and gaining the confidence to step out and reach out in faith. Now, the healing of Bartimaeus reveals to us Jesus' response to people who cry out in need. The articulation of Bartimaeus produces a response from Jesus. But the articulation was important. The Bartimaeus story serves, if you like, as a concluding bookend to a section in Mark's Gospel, which shows blindness as being a major issue. Earlier in chapter 8 of Mark, Jesus restores the sight of a blind man at Bethsaida. In chapters 9 and 10, he confronts spiritual blindness amongst the disciples and other people. And then, of course, we have this marvelous breaking in of the kingdom of God. It's wonderful to read about entrepreneurs of any kind, in any walk of business, in any area that we might find ourselves in, and to see somebody who goes, I mean, think of some of those people. Michael Dell is there in his dormitory with his mates, suddenly starting to think up ideas that will change a whole world of communication. But for me, one of the personal encounters that I've had that have changed the way that I've seen how an entrepreneur can use their ability and the context in which they find themselves was in conversation with Professor Graham Clark. I had him as a guest on the program and spent some time with him in private in the room before we went on set. And Graham, of course, has that marvelous piece of invention and science that will always be important, the cochlear ear. In business terms, it's not nonsense. Look at the share prices. But the invention was so very, very important. He was a man who thought time and time again he was getting near to the point where he was going to discover something, and then it didn't happen. Then he found himself one day on a beach with his ear to the ground. But I found it fascinating to ask him some questions about what motivated him and what made him on this journey. And he told me the story of how his father used to run that small Australian shop where everybody laughed at his father because his father couldn't hear. And as a young man going to university, he said, I will one day make it possible for people like my dad to hear. So you had this marvelous combination of phenomenal skill, a great scientist, a man who understood what he could do in that realm, but also driven by an enormous sense of compassion. And when those two things came together, you really saw entrepreneurship at its best. And I can't help but thinking that there is a combination, when you read the Gospels, of things that come together to make situations new and fresh and different. Let's move on to that point of out-shouting those who would discourage us. Tells us in verse 48 quite clearly here. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Out-shouting sometimes has to be the name of the game. So it was for Bartimaeus. He had to do that. The cry of Bartimaeus, therefore, is not just urgent, but earnest. Something he has to do at this point in time. He didn't have anyone to introduce him. There are examples of people, you remember some of them in the Gospels, the 4 friends who took the one to Jesus. They tore the roof open. Then the one that for decades had known what it was to be beside the water. And then the people that came. Here's one who had nobody to introduce him. So he knew that if Jesus was going to hear him, he would have to shout and shout loud. And there were far too many people wanting to quieten him down. And the vital link is very real in a context like ours in the 21st century Sydney. We often have to outshout disappointment. We often have to speak up for those people who have no one to speak for them. We often have to be the articulators, not only for ourselves, but for other people. We have to discover who our encouragers are. Bartimaeus would need to know who they are. Jesus stopped the Jerusalem-bound pilgrimage. I love it. I can just try to picture this. They're on a journey through the city. And Jesus says, hang on a minute. I know that doesn't say it quite like that. That's what he's saying. Stop. And you almost feel like they're going to bang into each other because they are determined to move on that journey. Stop, because he had heard the blind man crying out for help. And so there is this sense of which Jesus is responding to the cry that comes to him. Call him, Jesus says. And so it's very interesting, really, that this group of people, this is an interesting kind of churchy comment here, I know, that lots of people who were discouraging and all the rest of it suddenly become quite positive. Oh, they say, yes, call him, call him, call him. You feel like saying, just a minute ago, you wanted him to shut up. Yeah, but now it's a bit different now. And there's a change of attitude that goes on, particularly in this setting and in this context that we can't avoid. We often have to outshout disappointment at a personal level, at the larger level in our community, in our society. Call him. Jesus has often got time for others that are rejected. There's a powerful message in all that, I think. Soon the desire of the crowd who want to shut him up is, it's not shut up now, it's cheer up. How it's changed. Discouragers can be transformed by the power of God. Bartimaeus moves from his place by the roadside into direct contact with God in Christ. We realize that people, if they're going to be released and help through God, there needs to be that sense in which they realize his presence. I recall what Jerome said in a very different context in relation to encouragement, being a major area of service and mission. He said, correction does much, but encouragement does much more. Encouragement after censure is as the sun after a shower. Encouragement, of course, is very important in every area. And those people who need encouraging are not only the people we serve. It is colleagues, it is bosses, it's managers, it's departments. Every one of us needs to be encouraged to do the work in which we share. Brexit, the events in North America, leave many people feeling despondent, wondering where, in fact, the voices not only of reason, but of compassion are going to appear from. But you can't change history. The reality is what happens. What you and I have to do is work with what happens and make not only the best of it in a kind of miserable make the best of it way, but transform situations that may be hopeless into something better. I was in New Zealand when the latest list of the most unaffordable cities in the world were published. The reason New Zealand has made a lot of it is Auckland hit number 4. But it was a good feeling to say that we were 2 ahead of them. We could brag about being more unaffordable than you are in that context. But our concern, as one person already has said, is not just the question of the affordability of houses, but the many people in our city who cannot even begin to contemplate a rent, let alone buy a house. And we live in a very, very challenging social context. Bartimaeus' lack of sight would prevent him working to get to... There's no big issue for Bartimaeus. There's no alternatives for him to be able to find what he needs to find in his situation. And he had to articulate his desire amidst the clamour of many voices. Moving on. He had to move forward to accept the call to change. It tells us quite clearly in verse 50. And there is some urgency about these words. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. Jesus is not very engaged with the crowd, apart from calling them to enable the blind man to come to him. It would be so easy to listen to the negatives rather than to rise above the distractions. For the blind man to receive his sight, he had to be prepared to respond immediately. For his seize the moment, he needs to throw his cloak off to be able to come into contact with Jesus immediately. There's an urgency. It's a difficulty for some people to respond in a way that brings about healing. I remember on part of a much longer trip, just 4 days, living in a block of apartments in the middle of the city of Johannesburg. It was at the time when the dreadful Group Areas Act was in process, so it was illegal to stay where I was actually staying. And we went out at night and walked the street, where in fact there was so many things that brought us face to face with reality. Fires in the street to keep people warm, and a cold African high-level Johannesburg night. Shop windows boarded up. People trying to find somewhere to go. It was poverty in its rawness. Ralph McTell in the 1960s wrote the song The Streets of London. In it, this very talented folk singer talked about the different aspects of poverty. He talked about the old man in the all-night cafe, constantly in his cup of tea. Or the woman who carried all her belongings in 2 carrier bags. Do you know, we meet those men and women every day in Sydney. Whenever we have a homeless street count here in this city, I'm saddened at the growing number of people whose accommodation at the heart of a highly sophisticated city is such a problem to them. It's the flip side, really, of the pages of the Fin Review and others talking about how our prices have risen. It's the many who have nowhere to live. When we talk about seizing the day, we have to consider what the opportunity of seizing the day might mean for us. There are 2 kinds of opportunities, so say the Japanese. There are those we chance upon and those we create. Either may represent the opportunity of a lifetime to one individual. It was Lord Reith who had such a significant part in the development of the BBC's history. He said, I don't like crises, but I like the opportunities they create. We have enormous opportunities out of the sadness and tragedy of today's social context. The question that Jesus asked Bartimaeus is so obvious. What do you want me to do for you? To a blind man, what do you want me to do for you? The question was so important. But it was an essential question because Bartimaeus will never find his seize the day moment. He will never discover the healing of God unless he's able to say, I need my sight. I need to see. For that is his deep need. Jesus' question gives the blind man the opportunity to express his need. He needs to be open to all that faith can do for him. The blind man responded to Jesus, Rabbi, I want to see. What then happens is what Jesus gives him. Go. Your faith has made you well. There's a creative moment here in the actions of Jesus and the words of Jesus. There is a go in this moment. He's been asked to come. Now he's been sent to go. Healing precedes the instruction to go. Obedience is a consequence of healing, and we cannot avoid the demands of Jesus. Obedience to God prevents us from slipping for him. I recall the story of the policeman who noticed the small boy packed with some of his belongings on the back of his tricycle, and he was going round the block. Finally, he asked the little boy where he was going. He said, I'm running away from home. The policeman said, then why do you keep going round in circles and you don't cross the road? He said, because Mummy says I can't cross the road. And I actually think of that story as rather profound, actually. About the fact that we want the freedom to act and do, but we do so within a real sense and understanding of the parameters that are set there for all of us. God's blessing is appropriately linked to faithfulness, fellowship, and witness. We notice the final words in this section have a great deal to say to us. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. Jesus didn't say to him, I want you to follow me. He didn't say to him, I want you to become one of this crowd, but he did. It was the natural consequence that followed. What does it mean for us to seize the day? It will give us and mean for us that we make the space to build the platforms on which we can operate in a modern Australia and grow. It will certainly mean applying our services in a way that impacts appropriately in the specific circumstances of human need. How many of you have the experience of having neighbours build a house? Or the neighbours are extending their house? Well, that's been our joy for the last few months. And usually on a Friday morning, one of the things that I enjoy doing is going up into the study. You know, you just dress as you want when you go in the study upstairs. It doesn't matter, nobody can see you. Not now, not anymore. And it all came to a conclusion for me when one of the builders actually acknowledged me. I thought, oh dear, we're getting serious now. So this is happening, and my Friday morning sitting down to do some of the work that I needed to do is now accompanied by drilling and banging and knocking and all the things that make for the music of life. Well, one day I went on my usual exercise walk, which takes me past this house. So I'm walking up to the house and I noticed the people that are building the house. And I thought, this is a golden moment. This is wonderful. So I held out my hand and introduced myself and said, I'm actually living just behind you here. And we had a lovely conversation. And then my question was, I was waiting to say this, you know the question, when will it all be completed? And I tried to not let my face give anything away when the person said, August. August. Oh, very nice. The reality is that to achieve anything, and do anything takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. We know that is the case. Whatever matters, however, is that you make a start. And we have made more than a little start. Bartimaeus, in one sense, is a model of discipleship because he's a person of faith. Yes, he's healed. Yes, his needs are met. But he is a person of faith. And I can't help but feeling that at the beginning of the year, we must remind ourselves how important faith is. Faith is not something in our history that we kind of salute to from time to time. It has been the very heart of what it is we do and achieve. Faith is the insight. Salvation is the result. And discipleship is the way. Passports and visas are a rather controversial subject at the moment. Whether they are in Europe, North America, or Australia. And you know, many of us have the privilege of carrying 2 passports. The reason I have 2 passports is to see which is the longer queue sometimes, to be honest. But you know, there is a real challenge for the Christian church. A real challenge for Christian agencies to understand. It's a biblical truth. It goes back to Paul's letter to the church at Philippi, where in fact in writing to that church, he talked about the things that were true about their life together. And he said, we are citizens of heaven. Not Syria, not America, not Australia, not Germany. The Christian community has something vital to contribute to this whole conversation. And that is that we have a bigger agenda, a bigger context, a bigger setting in which we can understand life. And when we meet people in their raw need, isn't it a great thing to be able to belong to that kind of community? To know that we have a belonging that takes us far beyond the pages of a passport. To the only passport that really works for all people. Our identity in Christ as human beings. Here's a man in deep need. The beginning of the year, remind ourselves, deep need. But Jesus has time for the blind man. And the blind man saw and followed.